Blog Talk Radio.
He's back.
The irritated genie of Southeast. Every black person should know and understand what they're putting in their minds when they listen to radio, watch television, and go to the movies.
The children of Southampton present Entertainment, Fighting the Poltergeist, Saturday, July 10th, 2010, featuring the irritated genie of Southeast at the Shanghai City Cultural Center, 3117 Master Street, Philadelphia, PA. Classes start at 12 noon. Class 1, the history of entertainment, what it is and how it works. Class 2 starts at 3 p.m., deciphering plots and themes. Class 3 starts at 6 p.m., The Matrix Made Easy, reading the true messages in what you see. Come on out, black family, to the Shanghai City Cultural Center, 3117 Master Street, Philadelphia, PA, on Saturday, July 10, 2010, to hear Entertainment, Fighting the Poltergeist, featuring the irritated genie of Southeast. This is a free event for the entire black family. For more information, contact 888-817-3235. That's 888-817-3235.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Gus in for another program, Context of White Supremacy. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the broadcast. As always, I hope the programs are constructive. If you are not getting helpful information, please invest your time and energy in something else. We do not want victims of racism wasting time. Want to get started today. Real privilege. I'm super grateful. Our guest for today's program, she is the author of the ISIS Papers, third generation physician, general and child psychiatrist, joining us live from Washington, D.C., Dr. Francess Cress Welsing. Are you with us, Dr. Welsing?
Yes, I am.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your Thursday evening with us. It's so many people are always just thrilled to death to hear a little bit of information from you. How are you doing this evening?
Well, I'm doing quite well. Can't complain. What about yourself?
I am still learning, and more than anything, I'm just thankful to have you with us, and looking forward to a excellent broadcast. I wanted to hop right in. I hope this is the advanced class. Since all we talk about here is white supremacy, I hope listeners are very familiar with your work and have a solid framework for white supremacy at this point. I wanted to start with some current events because a lot of listeners, they've been asking and very curious about what your thoughts are about the catastrophe with the oil spill in the Gulf Coast. Could you share your thoughts on what's going on down there?
Well, the only thing that I'm able to say, and certainly waiting along with most people for the final report to come in as to exactly what did happen. But I think at the surface it's clear that British Petroleum was thinking a lot about profits and not really prioritizing the environment, the welfare of the environment, or prioritizing. I'm certain that they were not completely callous towards their workers, but as information comes forward and the facts that people had complained about things that were not correct and nothing was done about it, that the focus was consciously, subconsciously on making profits and, again, not the welfare of the workers and not the welfare of the environment as a whole. And I would relate it to the system of racism, white supremacy, in the following way, that, as I have said before, my thesis about racism is that it is a global system for white genetic survival, the white population on the planet being a very tiny minority amongst the world's people, and genetic recessive, and so that there is a conscious and subconscious sense of inadequacy. And if there is a conscious, subconscious sense of inadequacy, then the mind, the brain computer will dictate I have to have more and more and more and more and more money, profit, to cover my sense of inadequacy, and it's never enough money. And so that would be my comment as to what is active or what is the underlying dynamic going on, not only as far as British control of petroleum, but in terms of the total global system of racism, white supremacy.
Do you think it would be accurate to say that as long as the system of white supremacy exists, racist man and racist woman are most to blame for what happened with the oil spill?
Well, in other words, if you have a system that is the most powerful force operative on the planet, then that system is responsible. The system of racism is the most powerful force amongst people operating on the planet. So the things that we see happening on the planet have to be attributed to that system, whether it's what happened with the oil spill, or whether we're talking about the inadequacy of health care, the inadequacy of education, the inadequacy of housing, the high levels of unemployment, the much higher levels of unemployment amongst black people. So the things that are taking place, in other words, if I'm running a shop and I'm in charge of the shop, the things that are happening within the shop are my responsibility. It's my shop. I'm in control of the shop. So what's going on within that framework, I am responsible.
I like that metaphor. Wow, okay. One of the other big items, I have a significant number of female listeners, and they were paying attention to all the reports of what was taking place during the French Open with the gorgeous and talented Venus Williams, and I guess the tennis outfit that she was wearing and the undergarments that matched her skin tone, and I guess for some people it looked like she wasn't wearing anything under her tennis outfit. Are you familiar with what I'm speaking about?
Yes, I'm somewhat familiar.
Okay. I guess they wanted your take. I know some of my female listeners, they felt that wasn't appropriate in a system of white supremacy. You wouldn't want to see a black female dressed that way in front of a lot of white people who suspect could be racist.
Well, you see, from my vantage point, it's not just Venus Williams. I was parked my car in the parking lot going to the drugstore the other day, and I saw a woman whose clothing were cut so low she might as well not have had a top on. Do you see? So that the way that many people are dressing, and from my vantage point, not giving a lot of thought to exactly, well, how do I look, or how does this fit? Might put it in the category of young men walking around with their pants below their buttocks. Do you see? I consider that to be inappropriate dress. And it is tied to what people are experiencing and what people are thinking about themselves. It's almost as though the more that black men are removed from the community, either in prison or in drugs, or now some of the data indicates the increased number of black males who are focusing on white females, then the more black females are, not everybody of course, but some people are undressing so as to attract attention. And they may not be thinking about it in the framework that I'm thinking about it, but I would say that people very often are doing things because they see somebody else doing it. But they are not focusing, that's sort of focusing on the micro, but not focusing on the total context as a whole in terms of what the system, the power dynamic of racism, white supremacy, is like a broad circle around all of the different things that are occurring within that circle. And so within that circle, black men are being systematically removed from the community. The increasing numbers of black males who are incarcerated, the number of people who are addicted to drugs, the number of people who are just dropping out in one way or another, that is directly related to the war and the system of white supremacy against black people in general and black males in particular. You see, so that there is an attempt to attract the few, if I can say it that way, the few remaining males that are in the community, just in the same way my interpretation. And there might be some of your listeners who would not agree. But again, within the contextual frame of the system of racism, white supremacy, when young men are walking with their pants down below their buttocks, it's like a subconscious invitation for homosexual activity or male infusion. And I would relate that directly to the high percentage of absence of fathers in the home. It's like I feel a need for male substance at a subconscious level. And so I drop my pants, just as though I was looking for a homosexual relationship or male substance going into my rectum. And I'm sure people are not consciously thinking about it, but all behavior has meaning. And you only are able to draw, well, what is the meaning when you are familiar with the context in which the behavior is taking place. Someone was describing to me today the way that they saw some young black males dressing in the city of Baltimore, Maryland, and that they were wearing short shorts that looked like a skirt and a halter top. You see, because masculinity is being extracted. Again, it won't be understood unless you understand the system of racism, white supremacy is about white genetic survival by any and all means necessary, consciously and subconsciously determined. And so if a community is fearful of its genetic annihilation, then it has to attack the males that it is afraid of. The condition of skin whiteness is a genetic recessive trait. The ability to produce melanin skin pigment is a genetically dominant trait. And so black people have the greatest genetic potential to produce the black pigment melanin that colors our skin. And I maintain that racism is about the fear of white genetic annihilation, which makes the black male be perceived as the number one enemy, the number one threat, not of gun violence, the number one threat of white genetic annihilation, which is why after formal slavery, large numbers of black men were lynched and castrated. And the accusation was that they wanted to have sexual relations with white females, or they spoke to a white female, or they thought they wanted to thinking about a white female. And so the retaliation and the response on the part of the white collective and white men, but also, people who, trouble themselves to read the history. There's an important book, Without Sanctuary, where there's a pictographic as well as a discussion of all of the lynchings of black men that took place, primarily in the southern states, but not always in the southern states, and you have large groups of white men, white women, and children smiling, standing around and smiling on the destruction, hanging, and burning often, castration of black men. And so that was the symbolic act. In other words, if I'm afraid black men can cause white genetic annihilation, then what do? I cut off the black man's genitalia. And we see, what shall I say, we can see that it's sort of in microcosm, when white police officers stop black men and force them out of the cars and start patting them down and grabbing their genitals. That goes on to this day. And so, again, nothing makes sense unless it is in context. And I say that the most important thing for black people, we're moving towards the end of the first decade in the 21st century, the most important thing for black people is to begin to be serious and begin to be knowledgeable about the system of racism, white supremacy. As Neely Fuller has said, if you do not understand white supremacy, racism, what it is and exactly how it works, everything else that you think you understand will only confuse you. And that's why black people greet each other by saying, hey, what's happening, what's happening, what's happening? That is uttered 1,000,000 times, trillion times every day amongst black people. Hey, what's happening? The indication being is that I really don't know what's going on, even though I'm not consciously thinking that. But anybody who has to keep asking, hey, what's happening, what's happening? And it's very clear in terms of our functioning as a collectivity of people that we do not understand what's going on. It would be just like me, Cress Welsing, standing on a football field who doesn't understand the nuances of the game of football. And so I'm standing there wondering why the ball is passing by and why the other people are running into each other, and somebody might run into me and knock me down because I don't really know what moves to make. That's us in the context of, that's us functioning, or shall I say being dysfunctional in this system that we have been deceived and told that it is a system of democracy with imperfections. Well, no, it's not a system of democracy with imperfections. It is a perfected system of racism, white supremacy. And as long as we don't understand that, then we will be dysfunctional as a people. It's like the Semites of the Jewish religion in Germany and other countries in Europe when Adolf Hitler came to power. Hitler said that the Semites of the Jewish religion were not white people, and he did not want the Europeans genetically contaminated by people who he classified as non-white. Those were gypsies. They were black people who were in Europe and in Germany, and the Semites of the Jewish religion. And so Hitler and his organization systematically sat down at conferences and planned to kill 11 million. Well, the Semites of the Jewish religion considered themselves to be Europeans and Germans, and they wanted to be assimilated and accepted as Germans. Well, the word German meant white. Just like the word British means white, Scandinavian means white. The word American means white, which is why we black people, I call myself black, but many black people call themselves a hyphenated American. White people don't call themselves Euro-Americans. They call themselves Americans. So other people are Hispanic, people who are non-white. Hispanic, Asian, Afro, American. The hyphenated American is really not an American. American means white. And as long as we don't understand the dynamics of the system of racism, we are functioning like we have IQs, the average IQ of 60, 50, you see, which is not a passing IQ. But this is not to ridicule us, because this has been a deliberate deception. In other words, the global white minority organized racism as a defense and protective system to prevent their genetic annihilation on the planet. And if that is understood, it wouldn't be expected that they would, it would be a just thing if they came out and said to the non-white global majority, this is what we're doing on the planet. But you don't reveal your defense any more than if you sat down at a chessboard. The white side of the chessboard that plays offense, defense, doesn't announce the game that it's going to play against its opponent. It's up to the opponent to figure that out. It's just like in a football game or a basketball game. One team does not sit down and say to the other team, now these are the moves that I'm going to be making against you. They don't do that. The opposing team has to study past games or study the history of the coach, study the history of the players, examine in detail the kinds of plays that have been made in the past so that they can anticipate what to expect in the present. See, now that's thinking. And we have been, since our enslavement, we have been encouraged to emote. You see, somebody turns on a program such as The Price is Right. And, when they call a black person to come up and be a contestant, the black person is jumping up and down, falling all over the floor, just being behaviorally out of control. But that's considered normal. All of that emoting, because that's all we could have done for hundreds of years about our enslavement, because we were not able, being beaten and killed and raped and mutilated and worked to death. It's like, all we could do was emote, or most of what we could do was emote. And the system of racism, white supremacy, has attempted to keep us in that mode. And so it's not about, I would encourage every black person, forget about hating white people. It's not about hating. What we have to do is to understand the situation that they find themselves in on the planet and what they have decided to do in terms of protecting their interest. You see, whether it's psychological warfare, chemical warfare, that's crack, cocaine, marijuana, and everything that it's laced with, biological warfare, HIV, AIDS, Ebola, and any other thing that they attempt to produce in the laboratories that they have set up to make biological warfare weapons, or to make ethno-specific biological weapons. So understanding that, it's no time, it's a waste of energy to spend hating white people. Now, I would wish, I said in the paper that I wrote in 1970, the Cress theory of color confrontation and racism, I said the challenge for white behavioral scientists is to help white people become comfortable with their minority status and their genetic recessive status on the planet. In other words, have insight into their own behavior, because it's only if they have conscious insight do they have the possibility of behaving differently than they are behaving. But you have a lot of people who classify themselves as white who do a lot of talking about anti-racism and whiteness theory or whatever. But they don't talk about what the core motivation is because they are reluctant to say we are a tiny minority. We're not anybody's majority. We are a tiny minority on the planet. The overwhelming majority of people are black, brown, red, and yellow. And we are genetic recessive. White skin is not genetically superior. It is a mutation from black people. And it's a genetic recessive mutation. And so our motivation is to survive as a global white minority that is genetic recessive. They don't say that. And so it's as though they just talk about, some white people do this and white people do that. But unless you get down to the core and have a discussion at the core level about the motivation of people, you're not being honest. You're pretending that you're interested in ending racism, but you're just doing, playing the liberal game of talking a good game, but then when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, you really are not replacing the system of racism, white supremacy, with a system of justice.
Wow.
Well, I've rattled on. Maybe you have.
Not at all. I was just listening attentively and taking notes, and I'm sure listeners were as well. I mean, shared so much. I wanted to kind of go back and pick out a few things because you talked about your theory of white genetic annihilation, and just a couple days ago, I had a white person, Graham Raymond. He's a reporter for the Village Voice, and he did a 4-part series on rampant misconduct amongst enforcement officials in New York City. And one aspect of their misconduct was what appeared to be racist white supremacist activity in going to black neighborhoods and arresting people for nothing. They had photographs where black people were arrested and were not charged with anything. And they had audio recordings where enforcement officials were saying, go to this area, arrest the people. I don't care if they're standing on the sidewalk, inconvenience them, make them get upset, just any excuse to arrest them. In addition to that aspect, he reported what he termed a practice called cocking the memo pad, where these officials were drawing penises in different officers' notepads, their legal pads that they were using on the job. And this practice was rampant enough that they had to address it because...
what is it called?
Cocking the memo pad. And this is linked on the page. You can go and read this. This is in the Village Voice. But they would draw penises in the officer's memo pad that they would use on the job.
And to have you fax it.
Will do. But I mean, this practice was not just an isolated thing.
So how was it explained? In other words, what do they consider that they're doing?
There was no rationale given for why this was being done. It was just passed as another colorful episode of misconduct and something that these people were doing that was incorrect, these enforcement officials. But I thought...
Well, see, I would connect it in this way.
Mm-hmm.
Just as I was saying, that the response on the part of white males being fearful of white genetic annihilation and making false accusations against black men that they were interested in having sexual relations with white women, that the obsession with the black man's genitalia. Now, in my book of essays, the ISIS Papers, The Keys to the Colors, where I have an entire essay on the symbol of the gun in the racism, white supremacy system and culture. And the gun it's as though the white brain computer, the white male brain computer, looking at the black man and subconsciously saying, you have a weapon that can annihilate me, meaning your phallus and your testicles. I must create a weapon that can do the same thing. And the weapon is the gun. And so the gun is a symbolic representation of the penis and the testicles. And someone informed me that in the Charles Bronson movie, is it Death Wish, that series?
Yes, ma'am.
That he said, in I think the first in the series, Death Wish, that he says the gun is our penis. He's saying this as a white man.
Wow.
And it's just like the expression, son of a gun. Oh, you old son of a gun. Do you see? So here I haven't seen the Village Voice discussion, but if there's talk about unjust treatment of black people, unjust treatment, I would think primarily of black males, charging them with things that they haven't done, and then being preoccupied as a white male, and I'm putting penises on my memo pad, meaning I'm obsessed with penises. Well, that would indicate that they are not satisfied with their own genital apparatus. That's my thinking as a psychiatrist.
Wow.
See, well, their genital apparatus compared to the black male, in other words, white cannot cause any genetic annihilation of any of the non-white people on the planet. But the black man can cause, it's just like the President Barack Obama. He's an example of the genetic power of the black man. His mother's a white female. You look at Barack Obama, you don't see the white female. You see a black man. Because black plus white, brown plus white, red plus white, yellow plus white, all equals non-white people. Because of the genetic dominance of the ability to produce skin coloration. So, again, just go back to that power circle that is the context of the system and culture of racism, white supremacy. What are the dominant thoughts that are going on within that culture? We can look at the wars, all of the wars that are currently going on are people who classify themselves as white organizing death and destruction of non-white people, whether it's in the Middle East or whether it's in urban centers, on the streets in urban centers. These are non-white people that are being killed. It's sort of like mass murder, and the system of racism, white supremacy has to engage in mass murder for the genetic survival of the tiny white minority on planet Earth. So I would wish that people who classify themselves as white would get into thinking about, wait a minute, what are we doing on this planet? What are we doing as people who classify themselves as white? What are we doing on this planet? Since they have all kinds of articles and ideas looking at black people doing this and showing black men locked up and showing black people failing in school. The critical question is, what are the people who classify themselves as white, who are in control and in power and in charge? There should be looking at, wait a minute, what are we doing on planet Earth? Do you see, not trying to discredit, as you informed me, that one of the anti-racists said, well, Dr. Welsing just talks a whole lot of pseudoscientific bullshit.
Mr. Tim Wise.
Yes. Do you see what I'm saying? That if, while he simultaneously says that he's a racist and that he's a white man. So, again, the challenge is, and, I think I said this on one of your shows before, somebody has a better explanation of racism, white supremacy on this planet than I have stated. I'll give them $1,000 cash. If somebody said, well, I have a better explanation because, I consider myself a scientist, and if somebody has a better explanation, we want the most accurate explanation because it's not just about somebody spouting, this is what I think. We have a problem to solve on this planet. And, the great black historian and sociologist Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois said in 1903 in his book, Souls of Black Folk, the problem of the 20th century is the question of the color line between the lighter and the darker races of mankind. And the color line he was talking about was racism, white supremacy. He said it's the problem of the 20th century is the question of the color line. Now, anytime a problem is stated, a problem is there to be solved. And everybody should be determined that the problem of the color line, the problem of racism, white supremacy is going to be solved in the 21st century, sooner rather than later. Do you see? Because the people who are the victims of the system should decide, let me stop clowning, acting foolish, and playing loud music so that my brain computer turns off. Let me start taking myself seriously and deciding that, wait a minute, we have this problem. Like Einstein says, the people who create the problem, their computers are not going to solve the problem. Their brain computers are not going to solve the problem. And, if I were white and concerned about white genetic survival and fear of white genetic annihilation, I wouldn't be helping. It wouldn't be logical for me to be helping the people that I'm afraid of arrive at their maximal development of their genetic and constitutional potential. I mean, just think of the logic of it. I want the maximal development of the genetic and constitutional potential of black people. I encourage maximal development of the genetic and constitutional potential of white people, but not so that they can practice white supremacy. So wanting everybody to be maximally developed so that, we end up, the people of color should be our responsibility, and black people in particular, because black people are the mothers and fathers of everybody on the planet. The paleontologists, anthropologists are certain that black people on the continent of Africa were the first human beings. I'm not talking about apes. The first human beings, the first people who knew about family life, the first people who knew about mathematics, philosophy, education, architecture, mathematics, that we're the parent people, and we have been brought lower than low by the system of racism, white supremacy. I mean, to talk about we were kings and queens, that might have been true in the past. It's not true today. But it's up to us as the parent people to say, wait a minute, we're going to rise up and be everything the creator of the universe intended us to be when the creator of the universe made black people the mothers and fathers of everybody. And the mothers and fathers should be the people who straighten up the house being this planet, third planet from the sun that we call Earth. As Neely Fuller says, so that we can be universal men and women. Sometimes I think, people talk about UFOs, and I say these are probably some people from outer space coming and, observing the planet Earth and saying, are they civilized yet? You see, well, we certainly are not going to land because maybe there are some more colored people out there. We are not going to come down here as long as racism, white supremacy is the law of the land. We're not going to share other secrets about the vast greatness of the whole universe. But that's just, humorous aside, we can say that. But it's, we need to decide we're going to take it as a challenge, that we are going to be the instruments for replacing racism, white supremacy with justice so that there can be peace on this planet. Because all of this killing of human beings all over the planet is a gross obscenity. And I think that the universe is in balance. And while we are going over in Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan and causing war and destruction, and you see people's houses, people standing out on rutted roads with all of their belongings and their homes destroyed. And so the universe said, it seems that the universe functions in such a way that, well, maybe I can wake you up by having oil spills. You see, and wipe out, the interests of people and the part of the world that are going other places and causing destruction. It's like the old people used to say, show me a sign. Maybe this will wake people up. Because people are saying our industry is being destroyed and our jobs are being lost and our livelihood is being destroyed. Well, wait a minute. What are we doing over in other parts of the world? Do we care about the homelessness, the poverty, the malnutrition, the lack of education? Do we care? Well, maybe if I have some catastrophes occur in your area of the world, you'll wake up and start thinking twice. Those are my thoughts.
General and child psychiatrist, author of the ISIS Papers, Dr. Francess Cress Welsing. I wanted to get your thoughts, just if you could share your, suggestions. I know I just talked about the enforcement officials in New York City, this massive report of all this misconduct, some of it likely racism, white supremacy, the young 7-year-old Aiyana Jones who was just murdered by Detroit enforcement officials, right here in Seattle, Washington, where I am. A 17-year-old black female was just punched in the face by an enforcement official on camera. What would your suggestion be to black people in terms of how to conduct themselves with enforcement officials, to do everything possible to make sure that they are not harmed?
Well, first and foremost, I would say, instead of black people saying, well, what's happening? Why is this happening? For black people to start talking about, this is what we can expect to see in a power system dynamic of racism, white supremacy. That black people have to be demeaned, degraded, and killed. Now see, as long as we don't talk about what is happening and the motivation to do these things on the part of people who classify themselves as white. But guess what? I would say the vast majority of black people at this point in time don't want to talk about racism. They don't want to talk about racism, white supremacy. There's mass level fear. It's almost like we know in our gut, the minute you start talking about racism, white supremacy, that white people are going to get angry. And when white people get angry, they hurt you. see, President Barack Obama is even prevented from talking about racism, white supremacy. The Black Attorney General, what did he do? He started his job and he said, are we a nation of cowards? Not being able to talk about and discuss the problem of racism. And these two black men apparently were told, you better let that alone. So there's a tremendous amount of fear. If black people want to move forward on a job, they know to not complain about the racism that they experience 24/7 times 365 on that job. So we have to confront the fact that we are fearful of talking about racism, white supremacy as a total system. And what that system is all about, exactly what it is. And it's about the behavior on the part of people who classify themselves as white, who have classified everybody else as non-white. And people try to get out of being non-white by calling themselves Hispanic, calling themselves Asian, calling themselves Appalachians or whatever. I'm mixed race. There's no such thing as mixed race. You're either white or you're non-white. And to the extent that we cannot accept what is going on, it's just if you sit down at the chessboard and somebody's playing with the white chess pieces and you have to play with the black and you say, well, I'm not black. This is crazy. This is absolute insanity. Or I don't notice color. Or colorblind. Colorblind means blind to the interests of colored people. So the most important thing that can be done in Seattle, Detroit, Chicago, somebody told me that there were some 40 people shot in Chicago. Then somebody else told me it was 52 people shot on one weekend in Chicago.
Mm.
These are black people. Soledad O'Brien, I don't know how many people looked at the CNN program with Soledad O'Brien interviewing Wayne Williams, who was the accused killer in the Atlanta child murder case. And she presented to him, this was on, national, international television, wherever CNN goes. This is a week or 2 weeks ago, where she confronted him. I have this document, Mr. Williams, where you are saying that you were in a training program where the CIA was training you to kill black people. Now, who knew about that? He said he won't talk about it. And she kept asking, well, why won't you talk about it? He said, I'm not going to talk about it. But it was something that he himself had written. See, we don't want to go there.
Wow. I just, right before the program started, since you mentioned Soledad O'Brien, I have heard so many of your lectures where you implore black people to read the newspapers, look at the news. I was checking out CNN's website to see if there were any current events, and today, matter of fact, in 12 minutes, Soledad O'Brien is doing a report entitled Gary and Tony Have a Baby, and this is Gay Dads Unafraid to Chart New Ground. And they have a bunch of stories. They have 2 black males who are, I guess, apparently gay, and they're adopting children. You touched on earlier the extraction of masculinity. Do you think this is related to that effort to extract masculinity from black males?
Yes, I do. I think, in other words, it's in the ISIS papers, the essays on the motherfucker and the original motherfucker, where the system of racism, white supremacy, says that, I'm talking about culture speak, the dialogue that is going on at subconscious levels within the culture, but things that people say all the time. The reason that the word motherfucker is used so often amongst black people, I maintain, is because the white man is the man. Any other male can only be boy, girl, woman, or baby. And black men fought, don't call me no boy. The system of white supremacy says that you got three choices, woman, girl, or baby, but you're not going to be a man. I'm the man. Now, if you're not going to be a boy, then you're going to be girl, woman, or baby. And black men have called black women mama. They've called the men baby. The men call the place where they sleep a crib. And so that's where the word motherfucker comes from. So you see, and it's all about you're not going to be a man. And so if you have a situation where you have two males and a child, then one is the female. Now, this is no accusation against the men. This is not homophobic discussion. I'm talking about the behavior dynamics that occur within, where people are pushed and moved in all of the areas of activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. Like a black sociologist was explaining to me earlier today. He said, Dr. Welsing, the talk amongst some young black men is that they like to relate to women who are lesbian and want to be in bed with two women where one is a lesbian. You see, so the psychiatrist is going to look, well, what does this behavior mean? What's the meaning of this behavior? Because Neely Fuller, the author of the textbook for victims of racism, said as early as the 1970s that the system of racism, white supremacy, was going to have black men in dresses. And on one of the magazines several years ago, they had Ricky Williams, the football player, in a wedding gown, marrying his coach, Mike Ditka. But the black man was in a wedding gown. See, everything, in other words, if there's going to be white genetic survival, there has to be the annihilation of the masculinity of the black man. So you see black men with hair longer than women and earrings on. One of the gay football players said he was gay, but the amount of jewelry that the other football players were putting on in the locker room, would put him to shame. So this is no attack on individuals, but we are in a system construct that is moving us systematically and steadily towards genocide. I was just reading a book about the Holocaust of Semites of the Jewish religion, and where they talked about the removal of the Jewish men from the community. That's exactly what we have happening right now. You see, so that was a short 12-year process that occurred under Hitler from 1933 to 1945. That's about 12 years. Ours is going on over a more extended period of time, in which as long as people don't understand the context, they will fall victim to where they're being pushed. It's like if you are in a boat in the river, you're trying to get to a certain point on the other side of the river. You've got to understand not only the wind, where the wind is blowing your little boat, you've got to also understand the current in the river, where that's pushing you. And right now, it's like we are in a little boat in the river trying to get to some point we call success. But we have no understanding of the wind, and we have no understanding of the current in the river. And so, we're in our little boat, and we could all be drowned in short order. But we are being moved systematically. You see, when you incarcerate a huge percentage of the males in a community, and then the young males have no model for male functioning, but they have father hunger and longing for male contact and embrace. You see, if you start moving large numbers of males from the communities, then you end up with some females beginning to act as though they're the males, but they can't procreate. Just like two men can't procreate. And if people think that you can have two men in a household raising children and having sexual contact, and you're not influencing the behavior of the children, then you just don't have any understanding. That would be the same thing as thinking that you can speak English in a household and the children don't learn to speak English. Children learn by observing what is going on around them. And so this is, again, not personal to the people. But again, as long as people, again, I keep going back to the Semites of the Jewish religion and their experience under Adolf Hitler, where they didn't have a clue that there was a plan to really exterminate them. They didn't have a clue, and they wanted desperately to be accepted as white. And so they couldn't see, and even though Freud was sitting right there, and he couldn't see, supposedly the West's most important behavior scientist, he had to run from the Nazis. He was busy talking about sex repression when he should have been talking about the repression of Semites. And why should this white supremacy government be repressing Semites? But he was busy talking about sex repression. And so a third of the world population of Semites of the Jewish religion was wiped out. They didn't have a clue. And we don't have a clue as to what is going on. And we can sit up and look at Barack Obama, President Obama, being ridiculed and attacked every day. The stronger, the more critical the decisions he makes, the more serious he looks, the more he's hated. And it's because I believe even the people who classify themselves as white, who voted for him, who wanted to conceive of themselves as being liberal, if they don't understand the core fear, when a person says, I'm white, I am white, that's like saying I am a part of the tiny minority of white people on the planet and I am genetic recessive. And that in the brain computer has to add up to, I have to most fundamentally be concerned about white genetic survival and the fear of white genetic annihilation. So I see a strong black man intelligent black man, capable black man, who likes black women and loves his black children. In the White House, this makes me begin to quake. What if the people of color are in charge on the planet? So I've got to attack. Every day I think about, I hope nothing happens to this man, but think about what has happened to all of the other strong black males in our history. And what does the philosopher George Santayana say? Those who do not learn from history will repeat history. So if every black person, young, old, needs to stop laughing, clowning, being buffoons. I mean, just look at what is shown of us on the television. House of Pain, all of that ignorant buffoonery is worse than Amos and Andy could ever think of being. The film Precious, the worst imaging of black people that has ever been done in history. And intelligent people like Oprah Winfrey, they don't even see it. After somebody sees Precious, after they see House of Pain, see Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany, one of the most important people in his administration was the Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels. And he knew how to, they didn't have television at the time, but put horrible, despicable images of Semites of the Jewish religion in magazines and newspapers and movies so that they would look like life unworthy of life. The name Hitler called them was Tiermensch. That's translate animal people. Subhumans. That's us on the television. You even have some of these courtroom shows. You got a black female judge goosenecking her head. Look at the image on, what's his name, Jerry Springer. This is life unworthy of life. And we wonder we don't have jobs, we don't have housing, we don't have decent schools. Well, anybody looking at these images, these people don't deserve life. And at the same time that they talk about obesity being one of the most critical health care problems, 90% of the black people that are shown on TV are obese. You don't see any obese white women on the whole of the television. None. And so that's just like saying, look at these people. They're causing the explosion in the cost of health care. They just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, and they don't care. So why should we be making certain that they have health care? See, but if you don't understand the context, you'll just be looking at the images and thinking, well, it's okay to be hundreds of pounds overweight. It's okay. It's okay to be at House of Pain. See, that's parallel to it used to be Good Times was what? Good Times was television sitcom where the black father was unemployed and the teenage son was a buffoon and a clown. See, that's why they like the musical Porgy and Bess. Black people should never act in Porgy and Bess again. Because all the white people want to look at, I got plenty of nothing, and nothing is plenty for me. and a crippled black man. See, we don't have a clue. But we better wake up. We don't have a lot of time.
Context of white supremacy. Our guest, Dr. Francess Cress Welsing, wanted to make sure I reminded listeners from Good Times, John Amos's character, the father, was ultimately killed on that program and extracted from the broadcast. You told me, I don't believe it was on a broadcast, but you talked about...
He was killed on, you said he was killed on the broadcast?
Yes, ma'am. He died in a car accident. A different...
you mean in the program?
Yes, ma'am.
Was that a part of the story?
Yes, ma'am. That was...
I see, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, you, I don't believe it was on a previous program, but you talked to me about why we should not use the term hate crime when talking about racism, white supremacy. Can you talk about just the importance of terms and why black people, victims of white supremacy, should not use that term hate crime?
Well, you see, it doesn't mean anything. Hate is an emotion. Why not use the terminology racism in parentheses white supremacy? In other words, that's very clear. And then when we define what racism, white supremacy is, then we understand what we're dealing with. You see, but to say, well, no, we're not going to be talking about racism, white supremacy, because that's too close to what is actually going on. So we'll just put a nebulous term out here and have everybody running after new terminology. See, if people can get you to run after their terms as opposed to you thinking about, see, we need to go back to our scholar, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, who said the problem of the 20th century is a question of the color line. Now, that's what we have been experiencing, whether it was on the back of the bus, whether it was police on horses trampling over black people, or water hoses, or black people having HIV. It was announced on the television here in Washington just today that 1 in every 20 black people in the District of Columbia has HIV positive. 1 out of every 20 black people in the nation's capital is infected with HIV. You see, so hate, what has that got to do with HIV? But system of racism, white supremacy, that is about white genetic survival by any means necessary. Then I can begin to understand Tuskegee syphilis experiment. I can begin to understand HIV/AIDS. I can begin to understand the mass killing of young black males in Atlanta and blaming one person who couldn't possibly have done it. I can begin to understand the 1,000 people who were killed in Jonestown. I can begin to understand the mass murders that are going on the street because I understand what the system of racism, white supremacy is all about. It's white genetic survival by any means necessary. It's just like understanding how did 6 million people die in Germany, in other countries in Europe under Adolf Hitler, who said he had a white supremacy system. He wanted Europe to be pure white, not contaminated by people of color. So he killed a whole lot of people that he said were not white. You see, but even calling it the Holocaust, like we got a Holocaust Memorial Museum here in Washington, D.C., that's deceptive. No, that's a museum that is about racism, white supremacy on the continent of Europe. by somebody who had a policy about white genetic survival. And so they killed large numbers of people they classified as non-white, because Hitler said, I'm not concerned about their religion. I don't care about the Jewish religion. They are not white, and that's why I'm going to kill them. So talking about the Holocaust and not labeling it, no, that was a movement about racism, white supremacy. And so the more correctly you label something, it would be like calling a dog a bumblebee or a dog a leaf or a cat a cauliflower. You see, so people walk around not knowing what's happening. Now, somebody was telling me today that black people need to get in touch with all of the language that is, going under what is called hip-hop. There's some very, 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 very destructive behavior and ideas is going under the title of hip-hop. Meaning the kind of programming that black people are being given, the kind of programming that black children are being given under hip-hop. All the distortions of sexuality that are going on under hip-hop, leading to genocide of black people. But as long as black people are not thinking, they won't see it and they won't think about it. It's just like Jewish people being removed and, we're going to take you someplace where there are jobs and housing, and we were really taking you to an oven and burning you up.
Wow. You touched on one of the big obstacles that is obstructing black people's will and ability to replace white supremacy with justice is fear. Do you have some suggestions for things that black people can do to overcome their fear of white people so we can correct this problem?
Well, you see, black people are being brutalized. So you talked about a child being killed. Where is that, Detroit?
Yes, ma'am.
And what happened to the young woman in Seattle? Or you see, if somebody can just take everything that has happened, so-called police brutality to black people, take all the different cases that occur in the course of 1 week. See, that is instilling fear. Just like police officers, so-called, stopping young black males and frightening them and indicating, I can kill you, you little so-and-so, if I want to. See, that's instilling fear, 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 fear. And so it's only in the context. You see, you've got to understand the system and what the system is all about. It's just like the brutality that occurred on the plantation, where you have, maybe 6 white people in a big house and 300 slaves. So you have to have brutality shown, whipping and beating and raping. You have to have that going on continuously so that the 300 slaves will be afraid to try to even think about focusing on the big house. And so it's just like black people know if they talk about racism on the job, they're likely to be harassed and fired. And so fear, 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 fear. And so then the people start having negative, destructive ways of relating to each other. You see, but the first recognition has to be we are in a system of racism, white supremacy. Black people have systematically been made fearful of talking about the system of racism, white supremacy. So maybe the first thing we got to sit quietly in our houses and get accustomed to talking about reality. And not, I don't know why Frances Welsing talks about racism all the time. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
We have to talk about reality. In psychiatry, we say people who can't face reality are crazy, are psychotic, are delusional. You see, so we have mental status examination. Do you know who you are? Do you know where you are? And do you know what time it is? That's orientation. And so we have to begin to turn off that loud music. And people need to stop meeting and eating so much. Meet, if you have to meet, and sit down and talk seriously. And let's try to think about what Du Bois told us 107 years ago. The problem of the 20th century is the question of the color line. And we have a black president, but nothing has changed. The black president is in fear of his life because he's had more threats than any other president in history. He has more criticism. There's nothing he can do. If he came out and said, everybody goes to school free, everybody's going to have all the health care they need free, they would still be yelling and screaming about him. Why? Because just a serious black man raises the hackles of fear in people who are concerned about white genetic annihilation. So we need to transform. Do you see it? It's no problem. You know, it's nothing to be ashamed of being afraid. Instead of, I'm a man. No. Do you see when I say, here comes the man you are, do you expect to see my father? No, we know. Here comes the man, meaning here comes who? The only man on the scene, the white man, in the system of racism, white supremacy. The only people that have power are people classified as white.
Wow.
Now, see, facing reality, and we were trained in psychiatry, old school psychiatry. The job of the psychiatrist is to help people face reality, even when they are afraid to do so. Help people face reality, even when they are afraid to do so. See, a psychiatrist in Nazi Germany, for the Semites of the Jewish religion, help them face reality. You are not considered white. They're going to kill you. Now that's frightening, but face it. See, and so we have the same challenge. Face reality. Help younger people face reality. See, I would say the overwhelming majority of young black people, racism, there's no racism, that's old school. Martin Luther King, who is he? Malcolm X, who is he? I don't know what you're talking about. So the children didn't make themselves unaware. The parents are unaware, you see, or we were told, okay, the laws have been changed, don't have to sit in the back of the bus, can go to the restaurant, can go to the stores, can go to some resorts, can't go to all of them, can live some places, can't live everywhere, but you can live pretty much where you want to live, although most people who classify themselves as white live in neighborhoods where there are no black people. You see, but it's like thinking that the system was about, all we have to do is take off the chains. All we have to do now is change the laws. All we have to do is get a black president. Where the chains are off, the laws have been changed. Have a black president, but you still have a system of racism, white supremacy. But see, our children are not instructed because the parents want to believe. Poor Tiger Woods, he wanted to believe he wasn't black. And Cabal Asian. So the system sends a whole gang of white women after him, then they ridicule him, demean him, so he can hardly play golf anymore. Give him a white wife, now he's losing a whole lot of his money. Was supposed to be the wealthiest athlete ever, the best golfer ever in the history of the game. Now where is he? Nobody. Because his father taught him golf, but his father didn't teach him critical lessons about racism, white supremacy. Or all these, all these millionaire athletes. And every time you look up, somebody is sitting in jail. Don't understand the system of racism, white supremacy, and how to conform your conduct so you look like you're mentally healthy because you do know what's going on.
Again, general and child psychiatrist, author of the ISIS papers, Dr. Francess Cress Welsing. Before I see if we have some callers, I wanted to ask you to share your thoughts. You had told me before that a non-constructive setting is to get a panel of black people together to talk about racism, white supremacy, and I actually just heard Mr. Fuller say the same thing. Could you share with our audience why you think that type of setting is not very constructive?
Well, because I would say we have very few black people who understand at this point in time system of racism, white supremacy. So if you put 5 black people on a panel, or 6 or 8 or 10, they end up squabbling with each other. And so it just looks like, like a monkey show. So instead of that, you have one black person at a time. So if you had, 2 people on at the same time, you're talking to me. And so one of the other 2 people, well, Dr. Welsing, I don't agree with what you're saying. Now, I don't really think there's racism. Now, there's nothing wrong with that person, you see, but negating one another is how black people have been instructed under racism, white supremacy. See, don't focus on what the people in power over you are doing. Focus on the annihilation of each other, and people do that subconsciously. So you have, to prevent that, some people don't have to agree with me, but you have person A who has a different view. They come on, and you interview that person and ask that person what they are thinking about whatever, and that person explains what they're thinking, and the audience gets a chance to hear that person talk about what their views are. And then on another occasion, you have another person sitting and talking. Now, white people can be on panels because they got the basics straight.
Wow.
So you don't have any white person. You got 9 white people on a panel. Nobody is saying, well, I'm not white. Or I'm mixed. Do you see? No. The people, it's just like white people filling out the census. They can complete that in 2 seconds. Check white. Black people are looking, I think I got some Indian, I think I got some Irish. Now, how much mixed am I? And I don't really think I'm black. And do you see? But a white person looking at the person, they say that's a black person. Do you see? It's just like thinking that can Barack Obama go and stand on a street in New York and get a cab? Do you understand?
Yes, ma'am. Clearly, crystal clear. Wow. Do you feel like with the census and everything and the use of the term biracial, do you feel like that's another way to give particularly black people an out so they don't have to classify themselves as black?
Do you see? In other words, it's like the Semites of the Jewish religion wanted to be white. Under white supremacy, all the non-white people want to be white, want to identify as white, because they have had their respect for themselves as people of color. That's been annihilated. That's how a tiny minority of people can control the majority. You see, you basically have some of the majority helping the minority stay in power, because the majority of the majority have been taught to hate themselves and hate each other. And so when Neely Fuller has those, what he calls the stops, the 10 stops, stop name-calling each other. Stop cursing one another. Stop gossiping about one another. Stop squabbling with one another. Stop being discourteous to one another. Stop being disrespectful to one another. Stop stealing from one another. Stop robbing one another. Stop fighting one another. Stop killing one another. So just imagine if the non-white global majority, all the non-white people in the world, were codified. They didn't fight each other. White supremacy would be over the next day. All over Africa, white supremacy gives weapons to this group and then to the other group, and said, now, this group doesn't like you. Or white supremacy will cause an atrocity and say, they did it, so now you all fight and kill each other. All over the continent of Africa. They used to say the white people came to Africa with the Bible, and the black people closed their eyes, and when they looked up, the land was all taken over. So now white supremacy comes and says, okay, here are your guns and here are your guns. Now you all fight and kill each other because I need these resources. So you all kill each other and get off the land, and I can have all of the resources without any problem. So imagine, but imagine where black people would be if their behavior was codified. See, I call those exercises, meaning Fuller calls them counter-racist codification. I have to say really they're not negating that codification concept, but I see those are exercises in black mental health and black self-respect. And I add to that, stop using and selling drugs to one another. Stop black children from thinking that as children they can be adequate mothers and fathers. See, if black people really wanted to be strong as a people, I'll throw out a concept. No marriage till 30 and 35. No sex until marriage. No more than 2, no closer together than 3 years apart. Well, what do I do with the first 30, 35 years, Dr. Welsing? Go to school. Go to school. Turn off the television and study. Turn off the television and read. You see, stop throwing down trash where black people live, work, and play. Stop thinking that welfare will save you. Stop pretending that racism, white supremacy does not exist. And stop allowing white supremacy to cause black, brown, red, and yellow people to fight and squabble with each other or dividing non-white people. Now just imagine where things could be. You know, black people are always talking about want to go into business. How can you go into business if you're afraid of being robbed or afraid of being killed? You see, which takes us to another point. All black people should be talking about the importance of employment. Black people have 2, 3 times the level of unemployment. How can a man function as a husband and a father if he does not have a job? And so black people need to be talking about employment is essential. And every time President Obama says something about being good fathers, and all the black men should speak up, say that's absolutely correct thinking, but we need jobs in order to be good fathers. And even if that means WPA jobs like they had to have during the Depression under President Roosevelt, then we already, amongst black people, have depression-level unemployment. So we need jobs, building the infrastructure. But if men are not saying they need jobs and they want to work, they demand work so they can support themselves and so they can support a wife and support children. If they're not saying that, then they are falling into the acceptance of genocide.
Are you okay with taking some calls?
Sure.
Okay. We have full switchboard here. I believe this is Mr. Nero. Mr. Nero, if you have a question for Dr. Welsing, your line is open, sir.
You may need to repeat it so I can hear it. It's, you know.
Oh, okay. Mr. Nero, I believe I have you. Your line is open. Do you have a question for Dr. Welsing? Okay. He might just be listening in. No problem there. If you have a question, you can just press 1, and I'll get your line back open, sir, if you want to talk. Someone called in. I see you have a hand up. You're calling from a blocked number. Person called in from a blocked number. If you have a question for Dr. Welsing, your line is open.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Thanks for taking my call. Hello, Dr. Welsing. Thanks for taking my question. My question is that I came across an individual of the name of Dr. Shaby, and I was wondering, he basically said there is no such thing as melanin. what is your opinion on carbon and melanin? And where did that word come from, the word melanin?
Can you repeat the question for me, please? I'm asking the host. Would you repeat the question?
If I got it correctly, he said he wanted your opinion on melanin and carbon. Where did that word come from? What does it mean? And I believe he referenced a black male named Dr. Sebi, who I guess shared a different opinion about melanin. But I think that was the question. Did I get the question correct, caller?
Yes.
Well, let me just speak to melanin is the pigment in our skin that causes our skin to have color. And it's a genetically determined pigment, as everything in the body is genetically determined. And the quantity of melanin, if you have the highest levels of melanin pigment production, and melanin is a black pigment, then that pigment, the skin appears black. If you have a little bit less, you have brown, so-called brown, a little bit less, so-called red, a little bit less, so-called yellow. And white means the absence of melanin pigment. Everybody has skin cells in their skin called melanocytes, and those are the cells that are responsible for producing melanin in the skin. And pigmentation is normal for human beings on the planet. The absence of melanin pigment is not the norm. It's the norm to have pigment. And so I don't know if that answers the person's questions.
He made reference to carbon as well. Does that have a relationship to melanin?
Carbon is an element, so I wouldn't know what he's talking about.
Okay. The person called in last four digits 6232. 6232. Your line is open.
Hello, Dr. Welsing and Gus.
Hello, how are you? Mm-hmm.
Fine, and you? I have a question I wanted to ask from a psychiatrist's point of view. In the system of racism, white supremacy, with the male being, let's say, in a relationship between a black female and a white male, a so-called interracial marriage, what are the psychological effects on a black female when she is under a white male as her husband in the context of racism, white supremacy, and those gender roles?
Well, I would say this could be for black female, white male, black male, white female, that sometimes the person of color becomes confused about racism. And many times the person of color does not want to have racism discussed because their mate is uncomfortable. Do you see? So that the white person, to the extent that the black person in a so-called mixed-race relationship, if the black person doesn't want to talk about racism, now racism, white supremacy is a reality, a 24/7 reality. To the extent that the white person is uncomfortable talking about it, prevents the black person from being sane. And so then the black person, let's say that the black person is in a group and there are other black people, and the black people talk about racism, white supremacy. And so the black person who's married to the white person has to get angry and start an argument with the other black people to protect the interests of the white person, because the white person is a person who has power in the relationship. See, the black person can even ask the white person, what do white people talk about when there are no black people around? And the white person, by and large, will go silent, even if they're married. They are not revealing what white people talk about when there are no black people around. Now, what white people talk about when there are no black people around is basically the maintenance of racism, white supremacy. Like, it's going to be very interesting when Rolling Stones, the magazine Rolling Stones, comes out with part 2 of what General McChrystal and his staff were saying about President Barack Obama and the other staff, do you see, when they were being interviewed. I wouldn't be at all surprised if some racial-type remarks were being made. A white professor at American University, a white female professor, said to me one time, Dr. Welsing, I hate to admit it, but when white people are together and there are no black people around, she said, we are always talking negatively about black people. And the assumption is that every white person present is in agreement. See, it's like the experience of black people on a job. You don't have white people running and telling you what the white people talk about who's going to get the promotion, what the salaries are, who's going to be laid off. You don't have white people running to black people, revealing that. But at the same time, the black and white people can be going to lunch together and smiling and, God forbid, be in bed together. But what white people are talking about, consciously, subconsciously, is the maintenance of white supremacy and the prevention of white genetic annihilation. And so as long as the white and non-white couple are not talking about racism, white supremacy, they are being deceitful with each other. Because the black person, when they're amongst black people and there's no white people around, they'll be talking about the problems they encounter because of racism. And as long as those problems are not being talked about and what racism, white supremacy is, and it's incumbent upon the white person to tell the black person that they are in bed with. But that rarely happens. And so the black person that wants to believe that they are loved is really being deceived. See, now, it's like, think about all of the people who classify themselves as white, who are presently, June 24th, 2010, who are having sex with black people. And why are not all of those white people like a battalion of white people against the white people who are practicing white supremacy? See, it's a whole lot of white women, white men who are having sex with black people as we speak. But they're not in the army to stop the other white people from practicing white supremacy. You don't hear a peep out of them. You see, so what is going on? And that's why in Neely Fuller's work, he says at best, the relationship can only be tacky because truth is not being shared. The people are deceiving themselves. And he said it moves from being tacky to trashy to terroristic.
Thank you for the question, 6232. Person who called in last 4 digits 0043, 0043, your line is open. Person who called in last 4 digits 0043, did you have a question? would assume they are.
Well, let me just add this to the last person's question.
Okay.
Imagine a situation, a black male and a white female, and they have an offspring. The offspring is obviously non-white. But the white female tells the non-white child, you're not black. Now, every other white person in the world looks at the child and sees the child as black and treats the child as black. So the white mother has caused mental confusion, deep mental confusion, and self-hate. She's supposed to love the black man who's the father of the black child. But she tells the child, you're not black. So that must mean it's bad to be black. So it's some very complex stuff that is going on in the context, in the power context of the system of racism, white supremacy. And so what if black people and people of color said, look, everybody's fine as a human being, forget about color, but as long as we have racism, white supremacy, no sexual activity between white and non-white people until racism, white supremacy has come to an end. In that way, we are not into a deceitful and a deceptive type of relationship because it's the black people who think that there's no race problem, although they are encountering it every day, but they want to believe because they're in a relationship with a white person that they want to pretend that racism doesn't exist. And they are into a deception. It's like in Nazi Germany. There were Jewish men relating to German women, and probably some cases of vice versa. That did not stop the 6 million Semites of the Jewish religion from being killed, and the German people standing by and allowing it to happen. Next caller.
This person also called in from a blocked number. Person who called from a blocked number. If you have a question for Dr. Welsing, your line is open.
Hello?
Yes, sir. We can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you. Dr. Welsing, I want to ask you about so-called subconscious and the so-called subliminal. I read a study where they flashed images in front of participants, and they flashed the images so fast the participants weren't able to make out what it was that they saw. But after analyzing their dreams, they brought out the images that they saw in the flash. And I was just thinking about the television, and we leave our youngsters in front of the television, and it seems to be those images are imprinted in the brain, and I just wanted you to speak on how dangerous that is.
Yes, indeed, that can happen. Do you see that the images are going into the brain even though the person is not consciously aware of seeing them because they're flashed so fast and so quickly? Do you see? So that kind of programming can go on. It's just like going into a department store and there's music playing and there can be some subliminal message, don't steal. And so again, when a person is aware, we are in a power context of racism, white supremacy, and they are aware of the kind of technologies that are available. They have to think seriously, and especially when you begin to see wild and uncontrolled behavior on the part of young black people. You have to ask yourself, where is this programming coming from? Is this in the music that they're listening to? Is it in the videos that they are listening to? I don't know what's happening in your area, but in Washington, D.C., many teachers complain about the out-of-control behavior on the part of some black children in classrooms, such that it becomes difficult, if not impossible, to teach. Is it the children looking at television with all of the violence, even some of the crazy kinds of cartoons that are there, that are influencing children's behavior, and children being propped in front of television from very early ages, and maybe it's a situation of a single-parent household, and so the mother may be busy working one or two jobs, and so the children are not monitored, and the behavior is not being shaped. So these things have to be thought about. And again, within the context of don't waste any time hating people who classify themselves as white, but understanding the kind of dynamic that has been set up as a necessary dynamic for white genetic survival on the planet. See, if racism, white supremacy was not structured and set up, and the people who classify themselves as a tiny minority on the planet, white would disappear, basically, other than new cases of albinism, because everybody would just really not be prioritizing color. Everybody would just be intermingling. Well, then you wouldn't have large numbers of white people on the planet. So just when you see this, you have to say, well, something is going on that is causing this to happen, and it's important that I understand what that is.
Excuse me. Person who called in, last four digits 5128. 5128. Your line is open if you have a question for Dr. Welsing.
Yes, thanks for taking my call. Dr. Welsing, and earlier you stated that part of your role as a psychiatrist is to help individuals see or deal with reality. Is it safe to say that maybe more counter-racist should become psychiatrists? Because obviously a great many of us are detached from reality. So I guess those that are a little bit more informed about the operating system of white supremacy should probably explore that field.
You mean more black people should become psychiatrists? Is that the point?
Yes, ma'am. More of those of us, I guess that would be those of us on this call, becoming psychiatrists, just because we have a better understanding of the system of white supremacy. And part of the role of...
I would say that certainly would be wonderful as many people who are interested become psychiatrists, but you don't have to be an English teacher to learn English, right? So people can be in all walks of life, but be determined that they want to understand. Let's say if black people had the same fervor about understanding racism, white supremacy that we use to practice the latest dance step, or make certain that we got the next dirty joke down pat, or playing sports to perfection. If we had that same energy, say we have to understand what we're always asking the question, what's going on? So we have to understand and take seriously what's going on. Let's master an understanding of the system of racism and white supremacy so we can function optimally and really bring this unjust system to a close and replace it with a system of justice. Do you see? So don't have to be a psychiatrist to have that kind of respect for self, mental health, be determined, mental health, self-appreciation. I love and respect myself as a black person. So if something is going on in the environment that is antithetical to the health and well-being of black people, I'm not going to waste my time clowning. I want to understand that so I can be an instrument for changing something that is unjust and creating the conditions of justice in this society. Why? Because I'm important as a human being. My offspring are important. My collectivity of people is important. The planet is important. And so we should be engaged in respecting ourselves and producing justice so that there can be peace on the planet. Because I've maintained that justice is not something that somebody hands you. Justice is a byproduct of self-respect, meaning when people respect themselves to the highest level. Not I think I'm cute, but deep self-respect, which is reflected in how they relate to other people. See, just imagine, no black men would be calling each other dogs, no black women would be calling themselves bitches, no black men would be calling each other bitches, and dogs, and gangsters, and thugs, and hoes. I mean, imagine if we had stepped to that level of black self-respect and were determined that we were going to conduct ourselves in that way because we have serious purpose on this planet. You see, I mean, we can do that if we determine to do so. And I say we should do it. Another thing I just want to throw in that I think is very influential, that under the system of white supremacy, black people have been given the image of a white man as God through telling black people that Jesus was a white man, and so therefore the Father, God, has to be a white man. This is a very destructive implant because the very image that people of color are given of Jesus is the same image of the people that oppress black people. And black people are taught, and people of color are taught to want that person to love them in the form of Jesus love me. I want you, Jesus, to love me, meaning I want white man to love me, and I love the white man more than anything else. This leads to very destructive behavior of black people towards one another. Even Billy Graham says Jesus wasn't white. Jesus couldn't be born in that part of the world and be white. But the system of white supremacy, of white domination, of racism knew it's essential to implant into black people's brains that God is the image of a white man. And then black people have a musical, arms too short to box with God, meaning you can't liberate yourself from the system of racism and white supremacy.
I wanted to, I wanted to double check to make sure. 6232. Did you have another question for Dr. Welsing? 6232.
Not at this time.
Oh. Oops. I'm sorry. Okay. I wanted to give this one in for one of the callers. He didn't get an opportunity to call in. I have a full switchboard here. He wanted to ask about the importance of black pride, and if you think that is something that black people need to develop or cultivate in order to replace white supremacy with justice.
Well, I would say black people, I would encourage black people to get the films of the 1960s and the civil rights era and just look at the dignity and the pride and the sense of purpose that black people had on themselves, that when they were going up against policemen on horses and horses trampling people, and black people being beaten with billy clubs and being beaten or being sprayed with forceful hoses, and the black people were walking with a sense of pride and dignity and decorum. See, those images need to be studied.
Oh, you're okay, Dr. Welsing.
Okay. Those images need to be studied, and contrast that with black people being programmed to call themselves niggers and bitches and hoes and dogs and bow wows. See, this is, if you can program a people to call themselves niggers and bitches and hoes and gangsters and thugs, those people had become psychologically annihilated. And that is what has happened to us. So we need to get into a study. What is dignity? What is self-respect? What is pride? See, this is worthy of thinking about. What is taking oneself seriously? What is treating self as though you are really something of value, second to none? See, these are the things that we could benefit from thinking about. See, what the courage that it took for those people in the 60s to go up against, I may die, but I'm going to march for freedom and justice and the right to vote. See, we are soldiers in the army. We are fighting although we may have to die. The people had to have pride and dignity. Black is beautiful. Black is valuable. Black is something to be respected. And I maintain that the system of racism, white supremacy, understood just how dangerous a people could be. People would end the system of oppression if they valued themselves, if they respected themselves. So the system said, no, we got to program these people to call themselves niggers and bitches and freaks and hoes and gangsters and thugs. And we have to program them to look like that and to want to look like that and to think of themselves as belonging in jail versus being in the colleges and in the universities. So we need to study that political science, self-image, and political science. As I said, Adolf Hitler knew if I can destroy the image of a people in the eyes of the people who are willing to destroy them, I have destroyed those people. And see, black people are participating without understanding in the destruction of black image. So you asked a question earlier about Venus Williams and how she was dressed.
Mm-hmm.
See, I would want her to think about that. Wait a minute. How do I want to look to the world? See, am I aware that I am in a system construct of racism, white supremacy that wants to demean me or have me demean myself? You see, a brilliant tennis player. We can give a shout-out to Richard Williams, the father of Venus and Serena, the only person in the history of tennis, the only father who said, I'm going to bring 2 children in the world to play tennis and become number one and number two. He should be shouted out from the rooftops by everybody in sports. This as opposed to being an object of ridicule. He said, I'm going to teach these children to play a game that I'm not even an expert in. And they're going to be at the top of the game. Nobody in the history of tennis has ever done that.
I don't want to keep you. Do you have time for one last question, Dr. Welsing?
Oh, sure. Go ahead as long as you want.
This is a person called in from 4462. 4462. Your line is open if you have a question for Dr. Welsing.
Can I be heard?
Loud and clear, yes, sir.
Okay. Basic question. I tried to practice the code for a few years, and I was wondering, because I'm in a relationship with a black female who doesn't seem to get it. How do I go about showing her the importance of race? I mean, she seems to understand that, the difference between, racism and no racism, but she doesn't want to deal with it. She doesn't want to talk about it. She wants to change the subject to something silly. And it's frustrating because this is a very important thing to me, and I don't really want her to get hurt by racism, white supremacy. What do you think I should do?
Well, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. You can't force people into an understanding of something. But maybe if you say you understand racism, white supremacy, and I would say make certain that you treat yourself with respect at all times and that you treat her with respect at all times. Do you see? And even though she doesn't have the same understanding that you feel that you have, that you see, you could be squabbling, well, why don't you want to understand? Why don't you want to understand and think about it? Instead of doing that, you understand it. And so you conduct yourself in a certain way as a black man who values himself and who respects himself and values black women and respects black women. And so that's the way you conduct yourself at all times. Nobody's perfect, but you just say, well, this is what I'm going to be trying to do at all times. And so because she is treated well and treated with respect, if she values herself, she will have to say, well, this guy is really interesting. He's a very interesting, nice person. He always treats me with respect. You see, now if she values herself, she will value that. Now, if she doesn't value herself and value the fact that you are treating her well, you need to get on your skateboard or your bicycle or your moped or your Porsche and find someone who is compatible. Do you see what I'm saying? And it's not to put her down. Do you see? But it's like a person, and I'm not saying this is your situation, but there's some people who are kicked and abused and spit on and cursed at and knocked down, and they stay in that situation because they have not learned to value themselves. See, codification is, counter-racist codification is if you have to raise your hand as though you want to hit the other person, that relationship is over. Because once you hit the person, somebody's going to come on the scene who classifies himself as white. And they're going to say, what's going on here, boy? You see, so black people can codify the way they relate to each other, but the foundation is what has each individual black person, first of all, understanding the context of racism, and then understanding the importance of valuing themselves and dealing with the reality. You know, if reality means we've lost the tournament, so be it. We lost the tournament just for this period of time. But we can come back another day if we value ourselves and say, well, we're going to understand this game and understand what's going on, and we are determined to be victorious in establishing justice on this planet. You see, the vehicle is how we, you know, it's like boot camp training in counter racism, how you respect yourself and those things that I said earlier. Stop name-calling one another. Stop gossiping about one another. Stop cursing one another. Stop snitching on one another. Stop being discourteous and disrespectful to one another. Stop squabbling with one another. You see, practicing those, being conscious that white supremacy has tried to annihilate. I mean, the only way you can keep holding the people in oppression is annihilating their self-respect. Like Martin Luther King said, if you haven't found that thing for which you're willing to give your life is not worth living. Valuing yourself. And so this is what people need to be in the practice of. No energy, no time spent hating white people, going to hurt white people. So you can transform a situation by elevating your self-respect at such a high level that people just automatically, you better not bother that person. And the person is just quiet and calm. You see self-respect radiating off of their body, and they just may have on some clean jeans and a white shirt. But wait a minute, it's something different about this person. This person does not look like they have stayed where the system of racism, white supremacy needs them to be. If you want to see what white supremacy needs black people to be, just turn on The Family of Pain. Just look at the images of black people in the sitcoms. Look at some of the images on BET. Black people dancing and being vulgar, not knowing the place of sexual relations or the importance of sexual relations or the sacredness of sexual relations. You know, in psychiatry, you say, tell me what you do in bed and I'll tell you what you think of yourself. It's just as simple as that. Why? Because your genitals are the vehicle through which you reproduce your image. And so any demeaning or degrading of the genitalia, any degrading of the act of sexual intercourse, meaning activity between a male and a female, any demeaning or degrading that is degrading what we think about ourselves.
I think individual, he would be very pleased with that response. 909, did you have a question? 909, did you have a question for Dr. Welsing?
Hello?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Dr. Welsing, I wanted to. I have so many questions. I don't even know, but I did want to ask you about like you were talking about the stops, and I heard you on the show, radio show, where you said, you told them to stop, name calling, arguing, and snitching, and you went through it, and they said, yes, Dr. Welsing, yes, Dr. Welsing, and the very next episode, they were name calling other people, each other. That I don't think people take it as serious as as, you know, I mean, it's...
As it is.
Right. And how that could really change. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say that those behaviors, you know, when you say stop gossiping, stop name-calling, stop squabbling, that seems like simple, right?
Right.
Those are so simple, I don't need to think about it, but those are profoundly important behaviors that Neely Fuller pulled out in his thinking. I just think it's invaluable, you see, but it's foundational, and that's why I call them, myself, I refer to them as exercises in black mental health and black self-respect. But simultaneously, he calls them codification for counter-racism. You see, it's like black people valuing themselves, and so they are conducting themselves with seriousness. It doesn't mean that they're all stiff and bent out of shape, you see, but calmly serious about themselves, thinking they are of value, valuing themselves as black people. See, no matter what shade they are, they don't, I'm mixed with this and I'm mixed with that. I mean, when black people, and that's another thing, getting in touch with the whole color sickness, what I call color sickness, hair sickness, feature sickness that is taking place under white supremacy. You see, where non-white people rank themselves based on the programming in white supremacy, that light is better than dark. Well, how did black people get light skin? We didn't come out of Africa that way. Our grandmothers were raped. Our great-grandmothers were raped. You see, so if black people or any people of color who have the history of enslavement, where the color spectrum was changed because white males were systematically raping African women. And all you just have to do is look around any group of black people and see the whole spectrum of colors. And we don't look like we looked when we came from Africa for the most part because of the rape. And so it would be like if I'm putting a special value on light skin, and I'm not saying that light skin should be demeaning, but if that is valued, then it would be like saying, I am so glad that my grandmother and my great-grandmother were raped. I mean, this is so wonderful that they were raped. And so now I look like I have a white ancestor. Can we see how sick that is? I tell people that if I had 3 pills, if I went in the laboratory and invented 3 pills and I went on eBay and I said, I'm offering 3 pills, a red, white, and blue one, and you take the first pill on Monday and it will turn you white. The second pill you take on Tuesday and it'll give you long flowing hair. And the third pill you take on Thursday, you skip Wednesday, take this on Thursday, it will give you so-called white features. I would have more money than Oprah Winfrey by the weekend. It's because of the brainwashing. So we need to embrace ourselves. Nobody needs to, think of themselves as stupid or anything like that. Just say, that's fascinating. That's fascinating how we have been programmed into self-hatred under white supremacy, and that we are going to do our best as individuals and collectively to get out of color sickness, hair sickness. See, if I'm so busy shaking my head with hair extensions that I'm about to trip over, what am I thinking simultaneously about myself? Contrast that with looking in the mirror and deciding, I like myself, I value myself, I respect myself exactly as I am. Exactly as I am. Now, I'd say that. See, self-respect is more powerful than nuclear weapons. And this is something that we have been, we're being programmed. All you have to do is turn on TV. Black person turning on TV and just seeing white women with parted on the side, straight blonde hair, white men, white. No brown skin anybody. White. Yellow, maybe. White. See, that's your dose of programming racism, white supremacy. You got your daily dose, and so you can go forward in the day of hating yourself and hating the other black people that look like you. You see, so if you call an office, a black person notices another black person on the other end, they're not thinking, how can I maximally help this person? How can I give the most comprehensive answer to this person versus, what? Well, I can't help you. So it's challenging to have a concept of the work that needs to be done and deciding that, you're going to put your shoulder to the wheel to change this monstrous system through the transformation of self in the direction of valuing self and valuing other people who look like yourself with their weaknesses and with their strengths.
Thank you, Dr. Welsing.
If I could ask one, someone asked me this just a couple of days ago, just from hearing the programs that we've done, having white people on and, questioning them about racism, white supremacy. I know I've seen some of the video footage of you when you had your discussion with Mr. William Shockley. They wanted to know what you do to kind of get your nerve up so that you're not afraid when you go to talk to a white person about racism, white supremacy. Can you kind of help us out with some tips on that?
I don't even think about that. That's interesting. I just got a letter from somebody who said years ago they saw me on the Phil Donahue show and they wondered how I was calm and composed. If anything, I remember thinking during the Vietnam War, there was a female, North Vietnamese female negotiator for the Viet Cong. And I remember marveling. I wondered, how can she be so calm, when her people are at war and the people are being killed and destroyed. And I used to say, that's a model, Madam Ben. That was her name. But I think that I really have to give the credit to my parents because my mother was a Chicago public school teacher. My father was a physician, and his father was a physician. And I grew up in a household where people valued themselves. And my father's mother lived with us, and my father's father had died in 1909, but he was a physician and very interested in politics and helping black people. And my grandmother used to say about him, because I never knew my paternal grandfather, my grandmother used to say, your grandfather was a race man, meaning that he cared about what was happening to black people. And so growing up in that atmosphere, Richard Wright wrote Black Boy at my godmother's home in Chicago, certainly parts of it. So these were people who were political and interested in ideas and determined just determined that they respected themselves as black people. And so, if anything, that, and speak your mind, that was like home training. My mother would take us to hear people like Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, to hear Paul Robeson if they came to the city to speak. That this was, respect black people and respect the struggle of black people, and don't think of success as functioning in some community other than the community of black people, and getting an education so that you use your education hopefully to contribute to the lives of black people. I mean, that's just the home training. So when I heard William Shockley talking about, black genetic inferiority, and I had written the Cress theory at that time, and I just said, wait a minute, I understand why people who classify themselves as white have to talk about black people having something wrong with their genetics. In psychiatry, that's a projection because something, it's white skin that is a mutation to albinism. Albinism is considered not by Francess Welsing, by white medicine as a genetic deficiency state. So being a physician and knowing that, I just said, oh, that's the way that I'm going to address William Shockley. And I called Phil Donahue. He had somebody on the show talking about racism, and I just wrote him a letter. I said, you need to have me come on your show and talk about racism. And I never expected him to answer, but he did. I give him credit for that. At that point, at least there was some open discussion of racism. But I felt confident and assured in what I thought because, my thesis is not complicated. It's not Francess Welsing inventing any facts. The fact that people who classify themselves as white are a tiny minority on the planet is not something that Francess Welsing made up in her garage. That's a reality on planet Earth. Or studies in medical school about genetics or undergrad biology that white skin is a genetic recessive trait. And dark skin or the ability to produce melanin is a genetically dominant trait. And so I was looking for answers for racism and just those basic facts about our planet. I was able to understand, so I just felt confident in what I understood. I wasn't making up information. I was just using the information that I had and the things that I had learned and studied about, and using that, attempting to answer this critical problem. And, as I haven't said it already, to say that I was just, when I started training in psychiatry, I was fascinated. I didn't like psychiatry when I was in medical school because it was Freudian psychoanalytic theory, and that just didn't make sense to my brain computer. But once I got into psychiatry and started seeing patients and seeing black patients and wondering, well, what is making black people mentally ill? And understanding, taking histories on the patients and seeing racism in the history, everybody's history, some aspect and dimension of racism, white supremacy. And so I wanted to understand more about racism, and that's when I met Neely Fuller. And to me, Du Bois said the problem of the 20th century is a question of the color line. Mid-century, mid-20th century, here comes this man, Neely Fuller, Jr., who was a guard of the Bureau of Engraving, not a college professor, not a physician, not a psychiatrist, just a black man thinking about the problem, came up with the critical concept that racism, white supremacy was a system, a total system construct, which to me is one of the most brilliant ideas that came out in the 20th century. And since as a psychiatrist, I was looking for, well, what are the answers about racism beyond Marx, who thought it was related to economic struggle, class struggle, economic dynamics. Neely Fuller came up with what seems to have been a critical insight and a critical answer. So just having that, I just felt, to make a long story short, I just felt confident in what I was saying. And like I said, even now, if somebody has a superior theory about what racism, white supremacy is all about, put it out there, share it with me. If it looks like it's going to answer all of the questions, if it can explain ball games, guns as symbols, chocolate as symbols, sun tanning, all the things, if it can explain that, and mine is inadequate by comparison because we're looking to solve a problem. See, it's no different than in medicine if we wanted to solve the problem of cancer. And so physician A has an idea, physician B has an idea, physician C has an idea. It's not a matter of ego, it's a question of who has the best answer to solve this problem that we want to solve so that we can treat people and help them get well. So, I stand by that. Somebody has a better explanation of racism, white supremacy as a comprehensive dynamic that is taking place on planet Earth, here and now. If they have a better explanation, put it out there. Send it to me. And if it works better than mine, I'll give you $1,000 cash.
Wow. I think your offer went up. I think the last time I heard it was $500. So
no, I never said $500.
Oh, okay.
I don't think I did. I've always thought $1,000, but if I said $500, it's always going up.
Wow. Okay. 909. Did you have another question? No, you said you had a couple. Did you have another one?
Yeah, Dr. Wilson, you were saying who you are, where you are, and what time is it, as an indication of basically your saneness. Is it? What do you think when people ask people who they are and they go into like the history of Africa and their kings and whatnot? It just seems like when you ask those three questions to black people, they go off.
Well, see, in other words, let's say that if the history of Africa was the first civilization, and there were kings and pharaohs and whatever, and people were doing great things. But since that time, black people have been captured, colonized, victimized, and brought down to the lowest depths. So what do we have to deal with? Do we have to deal with what existed thousands of years ago? Or do we have to deal with what's going on now? See, it could be a football team that in the 1920s was the greatest thing that ever played football. But they became a failed team that was beaten by every team that they encountered. So the history of what happened decades ago, fine, but where are they now? You see, that would be like a student saying, I made good grades the first semester, now I have all F's. Well, if I talk about passing the year, what do I have to deal with? Do I say, well, I made good grades the first semester, but I'm failing the course? So the wise student has to deal with, well, I may have made good grades the first semester, but for whatever reasons, I didn't follow through. So I have to deal with where I am now. So before there was racism, white supremacy didn't always exist. People who classify themselves as white didn't always know that this was an entire planet, mostly populated by people of color, that could cause white genetic annihilation. So when they found that out beginning in the 15th century, they understood, well, we have to dominate and control these people no matter who they were, what they were. We have to reduce them to absolutely nothing, to where they are comfortable calling themselves bitches and freaks and gangsters and thugs and dogs, and where they say if you are trying to learn how to read, you are acting white. Now, for the first people to have university systems, to be reduced to people who say to be black means to be stupid and to be dumb and to don't know how to read and don't know how to do math and don't understand science. So if I have been brought to that low point, should I be talking? I mean, it's just a footnote in history of where I used to be. But what am I now? You see, for the first people who understood family life, to be taken to a point where they don't understand that to endorse homosexuality as a way of life is leading to genocide. And this is nothing against people who are practicing homosexuality, because even as physicians, we are raising questions. How is this happening? Is this something in the water, since they have found chemicals in plastics that can change males to females? Is this what is happening? Don't know. But again, do you see, you read history, read what happened in the past. Neely Fuller says his history is whatever is the beginning of the universe. Whatever happened in the past up to the present time is his history. Now, that's true for everybody if you're looking at the energy, chemical elements of, where life began and everything. That's true. So what point do you want to start at? But the point is, are you able to deal with the reality now? Let's think about it. Let's say somebody was a multimillionaire and they had an estate that was thousands of acres, 29 bedrooms, lawns, landscaped, every conceivable necessary things, all kind of beautiful things in the house, and cars and boats and everything. And then let's say a hurricane comes along and knocks all of that down. So the person, I used to drive around in my car, now it's gone. I used to be able to sail in the river, and my yacht has been destroyed. And all of my resources have blown away. Should that person keep focusing on what they used to have, sitting on the curb, thinking about what they used to have, and envisioning what they used to have, that they still have it? Or should that person say, well, I had thus and so in the past, but I don't have it now. And so I don't even have any clothes. I'm standing here half naked. I have only one shoe on my foot. How am I going to go forward? I don't know, but that's what I have to sit down and start thinking about, where I am now. And where do I think I want to take myself? Because circumstances have changed. My reality has changed. And see, there were nobody on the continent of Africa that ever solved the problem of racism, white supremacy. Ancient societies didn't know anything about white supremacy. So they didn't have the answers. They had answers for their time and their condition. At some point under white supremacy, that changed. Cleopatra, she was a white queen, thought she could consort with Caesar and Mark Antony, and that everything was going to be all right. But she was overtaken by Caesar and Mark Antony. You see, so the past, wherever point you want to go to, the question is, what is going on right here and now? Take the people in New Orleans and Katrina, whatever they had going before the flood. But then they had to deal with a flood has come along and destroyed my house, killed some of my relatives. Things are no longer the same. I have to deal with now that the flood has occurred. Can I bring together my thinking, my resources, my understanding, my self-respect, and make something happen that I think needs to happen now with these conditions? So these conditions for us is system of white supremacy. And history will record whether we come to terms with it, whether we are able to pull together an understanding of what's happening now. You see, but as I said, right now, everybody's afraid to talk about racism, white supremacy. Every black person, that's 99.9% afraid to talk about racism, white supremacy, because we are afraid of white people and we are afraid of the system of racism, white supremacy. It's really mentally healthy for us to say to white people, we are afraid of you. We are definitely afraid of you. You control whether we have jobs. You control our income. You control what kind of schools we have. You control what happens to the men in our community. You have thousands and thousands of them locked up in prison and having them forced into homosexuality in that setting. And we are afraid of you. We don't even know how to look you in the eye. That's healthy. You see, the white people will probably say, oh, no, that's not. And you say, yes, it is true. This is our reality, and we're finally getting enough self-respect so we can focus on that reality, and we don't mind announcing it to the world. Well, what are you going to do about being afraid? We don't know, but we're just at point one of being able to admit truth to ourselves. So we have to focus on that and think about that. Now, that's when the opponent begins to, if you were sitting playing chess and you kept saying to your opponent, I'm smarter than you, I can beat you, and the opponent keeps saying, checkmate, checkmate, checkmate. You see, but then when the person finally said, you know, you are a very good chess player. You have outmaneuvered me, outplayed me the last 10,000 games. Now that's when the opponent starts to, this person is able to face reality and face truth. So I better start giving some respect to this opponent who does not mind facing truth, announcing truth, facing reality. That's an opponent to respect.
Wow. Wow. You think? Do you think white people, they would really? Do you think they would be opposed if more black people started to say that publicly? That yes, we are afraid of white people. You think white people would do everything they could to try to get us to stop doing that?
Well, I think that, you know, that would be like the people on the plantation. Like Harriet Tubman said, I could have freed more people if they knew they were slaves. More people would have assisted in getting themselves free if they knew that they were enslaved. Now, I think that, you know, people who classify themselves as white, all they have to do is look at us. Look at the images of us that we don't mind having on television and the movies and saying, you know, these people are, this is life unworthy of life. But if black people start saying, wait a minute, no, we're not having those images. We do not, you know, we don't present ourselves in that way anymore. Just as, you know, white people are not stupid, they're intelligent, but instead of the majority people that have been brought into victimization who don't understand because knowledge has been kept from them, truth has been kept from them, and they haven't figured it out yet. You see, if the people are in that state, then the people who are trying to hold them in oppression can just relax. But if the people are waking up and taking themselves seriously, that causes, and it's not cursing, being discourteous to white people, it's just black people waking up and not being afraid or ashamed to face reality. You see, and the people who classify themselves as white say, wait a minute, things are different. Now, the people who classify themselves as white say, well, we've got enough weapons and we've got enough germ warfare. We can wipe out all the non-white people on the planet. And so this is going to be our response to them waking up and respecting themselves. I mean, they can go that route. Now, Neely Fuller says, okay, if you go that route, you could. You got the means, motive, opportunity. But then you are throwing yourself into conflict with the forces in the universe that put black and other non-white people on the planet. You see, some of which, you know, it's just like the weather being real hot and forest fires. And, you know, we had so much snow in Washington, D.C. during the winter months that the federal government, the most powerful government in the world, couldn't function. See, that's the real white supremacy. Right? You see, the most powerful government in the world came to a standstill because of so much snow. So the universe, there is balance in the universe, you see, and so whatever forces in the universe created the planets and this, you know, all of the stuff we call the universe. and put black people here. If the system of racism and white supremacy is thinking, I'm in charge, they're not in charge of the tornadoes and the hurricanes. They may be in charge of causing global warming, but they haven't been able to fix it. But the point being that there is a greater universe, but you know, people don't sit still. Black people can't sit back and say, well, we'll wait until the forces in the universe stop white supremacy, where the forces in the universe have put black people here. Like somebody said, they asked Mahatma Gandhi, what is the role of the Negro? And Gandhi is supposed to have said, the role of the Negro is to bring justice to the planet. That was one man's opinion, but we are the parent people, and parents are always responsible. No matter what state they are in, they still have the responsibility of straightening up the house. And, you know, we should welcome that. Wait a minute, you know, we got to get ourselves together. Do we understand who we are? We're the parent people. We're the mothers and fathers of everybody. We're the mothers and fathers of white people. You know, Star Wars had the symbolism, you know, Darth Vader, the black figure, was Darth Vader is like Vader in German is father. So like Dark Father. You see, and that was the father of Luke Skywalker, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So we're the parent people. We are in shambles. There's nobody else on this planet that is in this degraded shape that we are in. There may be people who have less money, who are walking around without shoes and without underwear. But we're the only people on the planet who settled for calling ourselves niggers and bitches and hoes and gangsters and thugs and dogs and bow wows. We're the only people on the entire planet that have decided that that is acceptable. And that is a great tragedy. It's a almost greater tragedy than when we were formerly enslaved. You see that you have your mind so shackled by other people that they can have you maximally demean and degrade yourself. Now, that's a major accomplishment for white supremacy and the running of a system of injustice. But for a people to have allowed that, even if this was happened because we were ignorant, that we didn't understand racism and white supremacy, it still has happened. You see, calling ourselves freaks and acting like freaks, and calling ourselves bitches and hoes and acting like bitches and hoes. You know, people saying, I'm glad to be a bitch. I'm glad to be a hoe. I'm glad to be a dog. I'm a dog. You know. So all of this is like the creator of the universe is saying, you know, maybe I've allowed this to happen to you. I made you the first people. If you're the mothers and fathers of everybody, nobody has more substance than you have. And so, made you the first people. The course of the universe is you have now become the most degraded, demeaned, self-degrading people on the planet. Now, I'm going to see if you can rise up to what I made you to be. I'm going to stand back. This is the creator of the universe talking. I'm going to stand back. Don't call on me for anything. I've given you everything you need. And I'm going to stand back and see whether you can respect what I made you to be. I'm going to see whether you can respect being black. You don't even have a clue as to how much power I gave you having black skin. What the importance of that black pigment in your skin is, how much power that actually gives you. And you have been brought to a point where you demean it and you degrade it, bleaching your skin. You don't have a clue as to what you've done, demeaning and degrading yourself. But in other words, this has happened in the flow of history and, system of racism, white supremacy. Now, I'm watching you black people. I'm watching to see what you make of this mess that this system has done to you.
Wow. We have about 2 minutes before the broadcast ends. I'm just extremely grateful to have been a part of the broadcast. Incredibly helpful information. Always an honor to have you on the program, Dr. Welsing. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your Thursday evening with us, and we will definitely be looking forward to having you back on the program in the future. If you want to, we have about 3 minutes left. If you want to take any time to say anything to folks who are listening in before we sign off, feel free.
Well, I always commend you. I commend, any of the persons such as yourself who are trying to have substantive, who are having substantive discussions. The most important thing that can be discussed on this planet is the system of racism, white supremacy. America's greatest illness is the denial of the system of racism, white supremacy, denying that it exists. And people who classify themselves as white, if there are any people who classify themselves as white and want to be constructive on the planet, they're going to have to look in the mirror and begin talking, not in a superficial, deceptive way about whiteness theory, but get down to the fact that white is a minority, white is genetic recessive, and all the things that people who classify themselves as white do in economics, education, entertainment, labor law, politics, religion, sex, and war. What they are doing for white genetic survival and to prevent white genetic annihilation on planet Earth and causing mass murder, and then wondering why so many individual people go around committing murder. Murder is necessary for the system of racism, white supremacy to function. So if people who classify themselves as white want to make a contribution to justice, they don't have to come and talk to any black people. They just have to talk amongst themselves and do whatever it is that they want to do about this unjust, horrific system on the planet. But as far as we are concerned, as black people, we have to decide that we are going to transform ourselves from the degraded point where we are. You see people playing with sex, breeding and studying, and making a joke of bringing children into the world. See, people play with sex. The joke is on the offspring, because that offspring will not be taken care of. When the child didn't ask to be born, their birth contract is breached, and they will be waging war in one form or another against the people who played bringing them into the world and then throwing them to foster care. So there's so much that we have to think about, and it's a great challenge. I mean, if we reach the point where we will decide, look at this mess that we're in, the people who would put us in this mess as they try to survive are not going to do anything really substantively